Hi all, welcome to the session on requirement gathering and functional specification document preparation. I'm Shalini Nerella. In our today's session, we'll discuss about the first phase of the waterfall model, which is the requirement gathering phase. So here we'll discuss in detail how an architect interacts with the client in order to get the complete requirement of the project. Then we'll discuss about the functional specification document preparation. So how we prepare the functional specification document based on the inputs we get from the requirement gathering phase, right? So let's get started. Now consider there's a client by name Skoda. Say it's a car manufacturing company. So they have their complete customer data maintained in Salesforce. And the accounts and sales data is maintained in database. And from database they use the data for say analytics or for any other means to understand their business insights, right? So uh, they want the data that is being added in Salesforce to be synchronized with database, and any entries in database needs to be synchronized with Salesforce. Clear? So this is the requirement. Now our architect gets on to a call with the client and will interact in order to fetch the complete requirement. So let's see how the discussion goes. Right? At first, the architect will ask for the scope of the project, and the complete scope of what we've discussed so far will be discussed by the client. Then the architect next would ask for the object hierarchy. For any CRM application or for any other application, the object hierarchy is very important. So there can be parent objects like say accounts, customers, etc. And related child objects, say contacts, opportunities, leads. So the relationship between these parent and child objects is really important for us. And say for database, we need to understand the relationship between the tables, the foreign keys, and which table should be loaded first. So all these details are important. So the first question would be around the object hierarchy and the table definitions. Then external ID. So for Salesforce update or upsert, we need an external ID, right? So the architect discusses with the client on what will be the external ID and suggests that it should be a unique field. So the discussion goes around the external ID. Then the runtime engine. So in order to connect to the on-premise database, whether they are going to open the port for us or whether they are going to install the Atom on the on-premise system. So this discussion goes on, right? On the runtime engine. Then let's consider few data migration tasks. We often can see tasks related to data migration. Say they have the data in a legacy application and they want to move that to another application, or say they are integrating with legacy tools and they want to move to advanced tools like Boomi, Workato, etc. Also, we can consider here if the data have to be moved from database to Salesforce. The complete data that is there in database have to move to Salesforce before they start with actual integration. Say if this is the requirement, then the questions would be like this. So we first should ask about the volume of the data. So how much of volume of data can come from database? So based on which we can then consider the parallel processing and object hierarchy load, whether the client wants all the parent information to be loaded first and then the child information. Like say consider account information, all the accounts should be loaded first and then the related contact information should be loaded next, or the account and the related contact information should be loaded at once. So this we need to understand from the client, based on which we need to do the implementation. Then data availability. So we need to make sure that there is no data loss at all. So in case of duplicates or in case of any errors, what will be our approach should be discussed. So in case of duplicates, what will be our approach? We might need a unique field. So what will be that combination? Say if it's account number plus first name plus last name plus email will give a unique value. So this is something that have to be discussed with the client, right? Also, if say account information is missing, whether we need to load that particular contact information or no. So all this have to be discussed. Then proper logging. So once the data is sent to Salesforce, there should be an acknowledgement. There should be a flag which suggests whether the record is migrated or no. So the flag can be a boolean value, say yes or no values, uh, date time value, or the best thing is also to update the ID back to database, right? So this is all something have to be discussed with the client on how what the flag should be, what value they need it. So all this. Then system generated dates. Many clients may ask that the in Salesforce the created date and updated date should be the same that is there in database. So then we need to suggest them that that is not possible because they are system generated dates. So those fields are system generated and cannot be modified. So instead, they can add custom fields to which we can add these values. So this is something we have to suggest them. So these are few of the details that we ask in case of data migration, and few of them might apply for data integration tasks as well. Then data integration tasks. So now the migration is all done, and now you want to integrate between the two applications. No, also consider a bidirectional flow. So bidirectional flow, which means the records that are created in Salesforce should have to go into database, and those records created in database will have to go into Salesforce. So while doing this, we have to make sure that the records that are created by the integration should not be picked up by the next flow. So which means, say the records that are created by the database to Salesforce flow in Salesforce should not be picked up the in the next flow when we are integrating Salesforce to database flow. So in order to differentiate this, we can maintain a field by name created by. So say if the record is being created by the integration, then the created by field should be updated as a system user or any such means, so that we can differentiate that this record is being created by integration or is being manually added. So this can be differentiated, right? Then frequency. So when the processes have to be scheduled and how frequently they have to be scheduled. So all this will be discussed. Then error logging. In case of any errors, what should be our approach? Who have to be intimated? And how the error framework have to work. So all this something we'll have to discuss with the client during the requirement gathering phase, right? So these are the few questions that can be discussed during the requirement gathering phase and can vary based on the scope of the project and based on the discussion that they're having. Also, the discussion on mapping, what fields have to be mapped to what fields, all this will be discussed. So once after this, with all the information that is gathered, we will then prepare the functional specification document. So let's now see how we prepare a functional specification document. So this is the format of the functional specification document. It may vary from project to project and company to company. So here we are referring to a generic structure, right? A functional specification will usually be prepared by an architect after getting all the requirements from the first phase. The functional specification document should be well formatted. It should contain header and a footer, and the header should consist of all the information like the project name, document ID, document version, etc. Right? And we need to have a section for the approvals from the respective teams, and there should be sections for document history, authors, for version approvals, etc. Then here we have the table of contents. So the table of contents should be well formatted with the page numbers and links, hyperlinks to that particular section. Say for example, clicking on introduction will take me to the introduction page here. So the first we start with introduction, and under introduction we have interface overview, in scope, out scope, assumptions, constraints, and dependencies. So under introduction, you will specify on the scope of the project what was discussed by the client. So here you can see that we have specified that Skoda is a car manufacturing company and it contains its customer information in Salesforce and synchronizes with database and the object that we are referring. So all this will be mentioned here. Then the interface overview at a high level, what is happening. So we are getting data from account object, and we on updating or creating in database, we update the status as yes or no. So all this information will be provided here. And in scope. So in scope, which means what is included within the project. So here we are integrating the account information. So then out of scope, so here we are only integrating the parent object, that is account, and we have no information about the child object, which is contact. So that we have mentioned here. And assumptions. So we assume that we have access for the sandbox and production instances of Salesforce and MySQL applications. And constraints. So any constraints that are mentioned within the project should be specified here. The dependencies, the object hierarchies, etc. In case if there are any. So here we are not including contact, but in case if contact is also included, we'll have to specify that the object hierarchy is account, the parent object, and contact, the child object, and account information should be loaded before contact information. So that have to be specified. Then the second section, we have interface solution overview. So at a high level, we give a flow chart here that specifies how the flow should be. So we get the account details from Salesforce. We check whether it create or update. We do little validations and check if it is a create or update. And if update, we update the records and update the flag to yes. And if it is create, we create the record and update the flag to yes. Right? So similarly, for database to Salesforce flow. So this we give at a high level. Then the systems used, we specify them, Salesforce and database. Then functional specification section. So here we'll specify the original BRD. So any documents that were provided by the client before the actual call, before the requirement gatheration call. So those will be specified here. What is the original BRD that was shared? Then selection criteria. So on what basis are we selecting the data or fetching the data from source? So here we are getting the data after the last successful run date and with the status which are as no. So that will be specifying. Then the mapping details. So here we have the mapping sheet provided. So usually the mapping sheet will be provided by the client and there'll be a discussion on top of it. So this is the mapping sheet that will be provided by the client. So they specify the source fields, the target fields, the mapping between the fields, and the sample data, etc. will be provided here. So if you see here, the first tab includes the Salesforce fields. So what will be the sample data and what each field does will be mentioned here. Then database fields. So here you can see the column names and whether required or no, sample data and description of that particular field. Then the mapping, mapping between source and destination will be provided here. Country code mapping. So in Salesforce, if it is IND, in database, it have to go as India. So this is something that we have to take care in the implementation. And the input data. So this mapping sheet is at a high level. In general, any logics or any complex mappings will all be included in the mapping sheet provided. Clear? Then file format. Consider we are working with a file system. So then we'll have to specify the file format and the sample file as well. Then sort order. If you have any particular field that have to be inserted in ascending or descending order, then you'll be specifying that here. Reporting. In case of any errors encountered, who will be our point of contact for each application? So that you'll be specifying here. One-time activity. So usually for many of the projects, the initial load will be a full load. and then it will be continuing with the delta load. So once all the data is pushed into the target, then we'll have delta load, which means any changes to the source will then be integrated with the target. So that is called delta load. Then frequency or schedule. So here you'll mention the frequency once in a day, scheduling daily, the schedule time, and retries. So in case of any errors, how many times it have to retry. Then security requirements. So we have to mention that the runtime that is installed behind the firewall communicates with database and the platform, and it follows 128-bit SSL encryption, making sure the data is transferred in a secure manner. Then storing or archiving requirement. So many cases, the client might ask you to archive or store the data somewhere for future references. So usually we store it as a file in the file system. So in that case, if there's any specific requirement for client, you'll be adding it here. Then exception handling or error reporting. So you'll be specifying in case of errors, what is the action that have to be taken. So in case of connection error, we retry for 3 times. And in case of data error, the record status is updated to false, and then we avoid retrying. So these are something that are discussed with the client on how our approach should be during the implementation, right? Then system requirements and non-functional requirements. So you'll mention everything over here, the Salesforce instance, the MySQL licensed versions, Atom, work at account access. So all this you'll be mentioning it here. Then what are the vendor testing requirements? So what exactly have to happen with Salesforce and MySQL? We'll be mentioning it here. Then user scenarios or use cases. Any previous use cases that we have done with Salesforce and MySQL will be mentioned here. And any open issues or any questions that you have with this functional specification, you can put them here and send it to client for review, right? So you prepare a functional specification document of this kind and share it with the client for their approval. So once this is approved, the next phase, which is the design and implementation phase, will get started from here. Clear? So that's about today's session. Now, next session, we'll talk about the design phase and then the implementation phase. Thank you.